Hi, I wanted to ask if anyone would be interested in a little plan I came up with, not non-diplomacy related for those of you coming from that. I'm starting up my D&D campaign again, the Hollow World as it's called, and I've always wanted to run a game where I hand off some of the major factions and NPCs over to other people. It wouldn't be like playing diplomacy or anything. You'd more be playing as a co-conspirator to create interesting adventures. Let me know what an NPC/faction would do in a scenario, helping create rumors, and whatever other ideas you can come up with. I think it would be especially fun if the candidates in the upcoming Inferno Guard election weren't controlled by me. There are some NPCs which are based off real people, so I would feel uncomfortable handing off them to someone else, but there's a lot of space that hasn't been explored yet by players, so plenty of room to put your own spin on what's there, or invent a new faction, species, settlement from whole cloth. For example, one of my players wanted to play a diplomat vampire, so now there's a vampire castle in the southeast. It's very cute. There's one of the dads there knits mittens for the players, magic mittens, so they keep their hands nice and warm while they're exploring the cold southeast. It's very adorable. Yeah. Here's a few examples that are at least kind of fleshed out of the type of character that you'd be playing. But I guess technically there's the vampires as an option. But they're a smaller faction, so here's a few of the more major factions if that's something that's more your speed. Uh, there are a few Carronade officials, their secret leader and head scientist slash experimenter specifically, that while they've yet to be formally introduced to the players have been feeling their effects indirectly for years. They have their own objectives, which no characters are privy to, but will likely lead to some big conflict with the players sometime this arc, with them continuing to act relatively secretly until then. Then there's the new king and queen of the Eternal Forest, likely controlled by one player. They came to power by disposing of, massive air quotes, the previous monarch, the current king's sibling, and scaring their family into abandoning their position on the Council of Nine. Nine tribes, that is. Uh, the populace is largely happy with the decision to pull out of the war and return all of their titans back to their rightful loop around the Combe Mountain. Long story, don't worry about it. But they're well, actually, I don't think anyone knows why they do that. Never mind. It's a short story. Nobody knows. But that well, nobody knows yet. But their focus will be on securing the throne as the surrounding powers don't support either of them remaining on the throne. They effectively they had two people, which their or the king's sibling had declared war on before they got deposed, right? And he backed out of that war, which pissed off his neighbor. So there was the two that already didn't like the um, Titanic Forest in general because they consider it like a threat to them, and then pissed off the only other person around. So if there's a war in the Northeast at some point in the near future, you can bet that the king and queen likely won't be keeping their heads and/or crowns for much longer. Yeah, they have crowns. Okay, never mind. I was like, hold up, lore pause. As a final example, there's the Emperor of the Clockwork Valley and his council. Following the breaking of the magic barrier trapping those born in the Clockwork Valley, the Emperor has shown himself to be surprisingly a force for the freedom and safety of all residents of the quadrants. Under his direction, the Clockwork Valley has provided the most war relief for the Inferno Guard, post-war relief. Fired Nora, the scientist that broke the barrier in the first place after her experiments attempting to create wild magic sorcerers came to light, and provided supplies and housing for those suffering from the worst effects of the storm in the southeast quadrant. Word has it, though, He serves a hidden mistress, and an unseen monster has been terrorizing the area around the Clockwork Valley. These two issues will likely be the focus of the Emperor. Right, right, there we go. How will these and the many other characters interact with a game where the players and the heroes of the quadrants, I use the player's interest to estimate the actions of, and to clarify what I mean by that, if the players vote to go on one mission, but like most of them also wanted to go on another mission, I'll either do it the next week, or if there's not quite enough interest for that, I'll do a what's the word? Essentially, I'll just treat it in the background as if other like heroes in the quadrants went on that adventure, so the players can still put their hand on that scale, right? Like when they're saying this is a thing that I want to do. It's just if we don't see it on screen, because there's not enough players who want to play through that scenario, then that's how that happens. Um, I hope that made sense. I can recut it in post if I need be. Uh, yeah, so they can tip the scales on everything from rescue missions to negotiating peace between giant magical bats and the Hanging City, all the way to stopping an assassination. How does that interplay with all of the other stuff going on behind the scenes that we'll be doing? Shoot, I guess we'll just have to find out. Uh, if that didn't give you the gist of the setting, here's the general outline. Uh, the quadrants are a dynamic campaign setting. Nearly every arc, there's a shakeup in some way. The last three campaign arcs alone, the sun and moon stopped moving, then they started moving again. The monarch was deposed. The quadrants heroes rallied to push back an invasion. The industrial heart of the quadrants was crippled by that war, or specifically their sort of chaos oil-like substance that they get out of seeps in the ground. The players ended up on the moon and made it back somewhat kind of near the quadrants, but they don't know where. TLDR, the quadrants don't have a business as usual policy anymore. The status quo is in the process of being written, and you can be a part of that if you want to. The Hollow World is young. So the beginning of the Age of Chaos, when the spirits formed and the roiling seas of chaos, or from the roiling seas of chaos, was a short 1,000 years ago. It's only been in the last 500 years the populations have actually started to grow. Before then, powerful monsters, creations of chaos, kept people's numbers in check. Adventurers, heroes as they're called, are part of this world's DNA, since many of the species were designed with the express purpose of being able to protect themselves from the dangers of the world during the Age of Chaos. Due to the chaos slowly boiling off of the first layer, this need for survival has somewhat lessened in recent centuries, and people started establishing the first cities. This is hundreds of years after that, but the world is still very different from an old world where like every piece of arable land is occupied by someone, right? Like anywhere that people can live, people do live. This is much different than that. There's individual settlements with hours of walking between many of them and the nearest city, and it's not because like they're uninhabitable or some kind of like inhospitable magical terrain. It's just there's not people to fill all of those places yet, and it's safer to live in the existing settlements than found your own a lot of the time. Uh, all right, then another point. The world is canonically a patchwork tapestry created by many individual spirits. So, with species being created by like the spirits of the world, so like for example, I'm trying to think of I can't think of any off the top of my head, but essentially, like one spirit will perform a very intense, long ritual and be able to summon a new species into existence. So that ends up creating a huge variety of residents within any major settlements. There's at least five like canon different species with origin points in the northeast quadrant. That's the most populous right now, but likely I'll continue to add to them over time. And there's also some that come from outside the quadrants, plus all of the base ones I haven't picked a particular origin point for. I know they come from somewhere in the quadrants because like there's a lot of them. But yeah, anyhow, some settlements are in the middle of an industrial revolution, while others have vast schooling for training heroes, while other places rely primarily on trade for wealth. In addition, I try and portray various leaders as having their own interests. Some of them genuinely do what they think is best, some work for secret masters, some desire only more power, etc. Uh, Spirits are especially quite interesting. They all have a core drive, but they're also people beyond that. For instance, there's no way to convince Ash, the spirit of Pyrocryo, to harm a guest within their mountain. But they're not like an unfeeling force of nature. They consider many of the residents uh, of Pyrocryo like friends and family who they've like grown alongside for some of them over 100 years. They adopted a child to co-parent with Faye. He's the spirit of a now connected mountain. Actually, long story on that one, etc. Basically, they it's a bit like having a deity that can create a new species with a lot of effort, but is also a regular person. And a lot of the spirits are closely involved with the lives of people in the settlements that grew around them. And another note, a lot of spirits are tethered to a location, so they're kind of supposed to be evocative of like not quite animist, where like everything's alive, but like somewhere between like global deities and like literally everything having a spirit is where the hollow world sits, right? Like the land has a spirit, right? Like every location is under some spirit's domain in general, right? Like or somewhere nearby is probably. So yeah. Uh yeah, and the quadrants is supposed to be about a quarter to a sixth the size of Connecticut. So like that gives you a ballpark for this is a very dense setting. I have a graphic somewhere of like an outdated map that I can put up on the screen to show you. Like it's a very dense, uh, very like chaotic world since it formed literally from chaos. You have places where there are huge bridges that span over like you know mile deep like drop onto the second layer of the hollow world. You have the under the ocean, right? So you can go down deep enough in the ocean that you come out the bottom and to the land underneath it. And I don't mean going all the way through the planet. I mean like you just keep like sinking, 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 and then you fall out of the bottom of the ocean and onto the ground below. It's that kind of stuff, right? There was one place where the players of the first ever Hollow World adventure jumped off a place where there was reversed gravity and floated back up to the surface, or like floated down to the bottom of the ocean and then used buoyancy to rise all the way up back to the surface from the second layer. And they did that because they had uh, like these huge leaves that they glided in on. I didn't think that they still had them, but they're like, well, we never put them down. And I was like, I guess you're right. Uh, yeah, sure, you could do that. That's actually really cool because then they like glided down and they're essentially like parasailing next to this upside down waterfall roaring next to them, plunging into the ocean above it. Um, and like they managed to like splash down and float back up to the surface. And then I mean it took them a while to swim in because they were kind of out in the ocean a little ways, but no, they're not like too far. So that was an awesome thing. And I love those sorts of things with the Hollow World because like it's so over the top. It has like I don't know what to say because it's not like grounded in any sane way, but it's like once you add in enough patchwork stuff and you add a lore reason that things should be patchwork, the inconsistency starts to feel like that's just how this world works, right? Like everything, right? Like the for instance, humans in this setting, right? They don't work because they have cells and, like cellular machinery inside of that metabolizing the food that they eat, right? They're made out of magic, right? Like their bodies function day to day because of the magical processes that extract like energy from their food and then power their body, right? Like their intelligence isn't powered by electrical reactions in their brain. It's like a complex magical system that can learn and adapt and change over time, right? Similarly with their strength and stuff like that. So it isn't like magic is layered on top of a normal world, right? Species in the hollow world, except for automatons, but they're like sort of robot-y mechanical thingy doodles, um, just operate blatantly by magic. Like that's if you ask a scientist in the hollow world, right? Like why does my heart beat, right? It's cuz magic. It's literally because of magic cuz that's the fundamental law of the universe that it operates by. And I won't go any more into that because that's the limit of what most people would know. But yeah, it's interesting. It's fun stuff. Also, just a small disclaimer here at the end: the Hollow World is meant to be a setting that anyone else can see themselves in, and it's not firmly tethered to our world or another fictional work. By this, I mean the assumptions of Fantasyland, like Tolkien-esque style, Tolkien Tolkien-esque style fantasy worlds or generic D&D lore just don't apply here, right? No elf is going to bat an eye at seeing an orc in a tavern, nor would it be weird for someone to be openly queer, trans, poly, etc., right? Like disabled. Uh, all those sorts of things are just considered like, oh, that's a person. That's a person. Yeah, I was going to say human, but not necessarily. Um, uh, there aren't any gods or planes or other planets or stars. You just have the hollow world, its rings, and then the moon and the sun. And the sun is significantly smaller than the hollow world, and it orbits around it along with the moon. Uh, so yeah, and don't get me wrong either. This world isn't like perfect paradise, happy fun times. There are places to live that are awful and serious issues and sometimes dark stuff that crops up during the campaign. This is a good time to mention if there's anything that you don't want to come up during the campaign, feel free to just shoot me a list of your lines and veils if you're familiar with that, or just like what because I know one of my players isn't okay with like body horror, right? So they like told me that, and now I know, right? Like I'm not going to include that when they're playing. Uh, so yeah. Right. Back to the disclaimer. It's supposed to be short. Uh, okay, so yeah, there's awful stuff. It's just not related to the fantasy tropes, if that makes sense. I.e., the Inferno Guard didn't go to war with the Coalition because of the species that they were. They were all intermixed populations of numerous species, and then or because they're evil or anything like that, or their enemies were evil. They attacked because Audrey, the Inferno Guard's ex acting leader now, had a focus to prove her worth as a general to silence internal challengers. She did win the war. She did, however, get assassinated for using the portal that their whole order was dedicated to making sure didn't get used. So uh, win some and you lose some. Uh, Also, I did check in with Flair to make sure that this is okay. So I'm not just dropping this because like I figured, like he might not want people chatting outside the game. But yeah, I just zero press chat, obviously, right, with me or anyone else involved. But yeah, that'll be the video. Thank you all so much for listening. Anyone who made it to the end, if you're interested in playing or co-conspiring with me to, like run a faction or whatever, uh, go ahead and react with whatever emoji and or just shoot me a DM.